Welcome. Let's give everyone a few more seconds to join. We will begin shortly. Welcome, everyone. I'm Talia McMillan with Motifworks and delighted to have you all with us for today's webinar, Disaster Recovery Planning Using Azure Site Recovery. Our presenter today is Murad Kiani, Cloud Solutions Architect with Motifworks. Before we get started, let me go through a few webinar items. Please be sure you've downloaded GoToWebinar so you can join in fully. If you have any audio trouble, check your speakers or headphones. We also welcome your questions at any time during today's webinar. Just post your questions using the question box on your screen. We'll also have dedicated question and answer time after the presentation. Let me take a moment to introduce our presenter, Murad Kiani and Motifworks. Founded in 2010, Motifworks, a company born in cloud, is focused on helping companies drive value through cloud enablement. We have completed 50+ cloud engagements for Fortune 100 and mid-market companies. Motifworks provides services for cloud migration, building native cloud applications, DevOps, and advanced data analytics. Murad, a cloud solutions architect with Motifworks, is a seasoned architect with over 18 years of experience in IT industry, with the last 5 in cloud computing. Murad's main focus is to help customers strategize and design cloud-based solutions. Before I hand it over to Murad, I want to mention we will be posting a couple of polls for you to take. So let's get going. Murad, I'll pass this over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Talia. This is Murad Kiani, and first, let me welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for you guys to join us on this webinar. And today's agenda, we're going to cover these 4 items. Why do you need a DR? How do you plan a DR? What sort of roles and what kind of a tooling that Microsoft provides through Azure Site Recovery. And then last not the least, the pricing, which is a very important component of the disaster recovery as well. So before I jump into other slides, we will going to post a poll. Please answer that question.
Please take a few seconds to complete our first poll. We will give a few more seconds for those still completing. Murad?
Yes, thank you very much. So why do we need a DR? As a human, as you know, we are humans. We make mistakes, and you guys would be surprised to learn, as per the EMA, 80% of unplanned outages are just caused by administrators or the result of misconfigurations. If you go back in the past, not long ago, it was very difficult to set up a disaster recovery prior to virtual machines. With the advancement in the virtualization, the cost has gone down. However, you still have to maintain the infrastructure. Now, with the cloud advancement, at least you don't have to worry about that. We're going to talk a bit more about this costing in upcoming slides. Then imagine that if you are running an e-commerce site, or if you are running if you're a Target or Walmart, where you have where the customer expectation is that you always be online, you always be available. So if the site goes down due to any major disaster, not only you will going to lose the customer, you will going to also lose the revenue as well. Around, if we look at the statistics, around 43% of the companies were immediately gone out of the business when a major disaster happened, and they lost the records. And another 51% closed their doors within 2 years. Now that's a huge number. Now the other thing is we live in an environment where, again, I'm going back to the customer, where the expectation is that you will gonna be available 24/7. And this is imperative for your customer retention. This could be another clear business reason to have a solid DR in place, not only for customer, but in your house. If you're running applications, collaboration or internal application, where you support your internal processes and external customers, you want to make sure that in case of a disaster, you'll be able to recover. We all know that, machines are machines. And at the end of the day, we know that the system breaks. And we still have, at some point, we have experienced that. So we need to make sure that we have something in place in case something like that happens, we can recover. And then last but not the least, if you think of it, virtually all the areas are subject of some sort of disaster within US. And I was reading the other day that the natural disaster has cost $2.5 trillion lost since 2000. That's a huge number. So how to plan for disaster recovery? So we are going to discuss, some of the, before we jump into Azure Site Recovery, let's spend some time in understanding some of the basics, some of the terminology that you would hear a lot that I'm going to talk during my presentation. One of the two most important parameters of disaster recoveries are RPO, recovery point objective, and then recovery time objective. So when we talk about recovery point objective, it is basically how much data you can afford to lose. So for example, you back up at 6 a.m. and system goes down at 8 a.m. Everything after 8 a.m. will be lost. Now with the cloud, that RPO can be as low as 1 minute. However, keep in mind, if when you go this low, the cost would be substantially higher. Again, we're going to discuss, you have to basically look at how, when you're doing the assessment, you have to look at the application and then identify what kind of a RPO or RTO you would need in order to recover and back in business. Then the next thing is recovery time objective. So this is how much time would it take to recover after the business process disruption. So if something goes down, how long it will going to take, the strategy that you have implemented, how long it will going to take for you to recover back and be in business. Then the third thing is failover. Again, just to simplify it, it is a process that you can use to bring back your site on a protected site. You can perform a planned activity to test your failover, or it could be an unplanned that could have caused by a disaster. Then the last thing is disaster recovery plan. So in case of a disaster, if something happens, what would be your process to recover your data? How would you recover it back? In an environment, typically in an environment, things are not in isolation. You have so many different applications running. You might have SharePoint, you might have SAP, you might have so many other applications running. So you have to identify those dependencies, and you need to have some kind of a successful plan in implementation so that in case if something happens, how are you going to ensure that you would be able to recover and back and then be back in business? So we are going to cover this in a little bit more in detail. So from a business continuity, you have three different models, and it's a widespread thing. It's basically comprised of policies and procedures that exist in the organization. If you look at typically, the first thing is the high availability. You design the infrastructure for the so that it can maximize the availability. You leverage multiple instances of virtual machines or servers. So if one goes down, the other one can pick up, or the traffic can be routed to another instance, so you still be in a business. Um, the 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 good example would be an e-commerce site. You might be running a couple of public-facing customer site that is running on multiple front ends. So if one server goes down, another one can pick up, or maybe both are running at the same time, and through load balancer, if something goes down, another one can still be able to perform the job. So it is basically to making sure you are running the application 24/7. The next is from there we go to secondary option, that is the backup. And in the backup, you typically make sure that your data is protected and safe. So in case of something happens, you can you have already taken the backup. We would be able to restore it and provision the virtual machine or server so that you can do your business again. The next thing, and from there, the last one and the main topic for this webinar is the disaster recovery. And it is to be able to recover in case of major disaster from. So if something happens, you should still be able to recover from the backup and spin up the environment. And again, this is the main topic we were going to cover, how to meet the need of your availability requirements using cloud platform for your customers and stakeholders using disaster recovery tools that Microsoft provides. So let me step back here a little bit. So when you start thinking of disaster recovery and business continuity, the first step typically that you need to take, and which is imperative, to perform an assessment. You cannot just bypass that. You have to perform an assessment on your application portfolio. And if you look at this slide, going from left to right, depending on the complexity of your application, you may find that some of the application you can just rebuild from the backup. So for instance, you have reports. You have a database that populate those reports. And you know that if that application goes down, it is something you can wait. You can recover, rebuild, and then reuse it. But then from there, moving from there, you might have an internal application that is critical to run your process or to support customer. You may want to recover faster in that case. And then in some cases, you might have a customer-facing application where your reputation would be at stake, and you would lose customer as well as the revenue. So this application you would like to recover as quickly as possible. So again, on the left side, it is something that you can. If you look at how critical it is for your business, you might be able to recover it from the backup. But in case if it is very critical for your business, you would like to set up an auto failover. So in case of something happens, you can recover quickly and still be in business. So when you are doing that assessment, and identifying and building the portfolio of your applications and workload. The typical process, and again, it varies. There is no hard and fast rule. Depending on what meets your need, you could basically define the different attributes that you think would help in case of something or in case of disaster happens. But typically, when you are identifying applications and building a strategy for each critical application, you first identify the RTO and RTO. It could be 15 minutes, and the RTO recovery time objective could be 2 hours. So within 2 hours, you want to basically be back you want to provision the environment so that it can recover and be back. Then what are the different threats you think that you're gonna face, or your application system or environment can face? You have to identify those. What could be the prevention strategy? Can you just do a backup? Can you just take your environment and replicate on another site? So you have to come up with all those different preventations. Then the last thing is, not the last thing, then you have to come up with a response strategy. In case something happens, what were you all going to do? And how you would basically respond. Who would be the key people or the stakeholders? Not stakeholders, sorry, the people that you were going to contact. Here's one of the other things that we need to remember when we are crafting or assembling this strategy. We need to involve it's basically a combination of people, process, and technology. So you have to identify the stakeholders as well. You have to identify stakeholders from different departments so that you would know how they utilize application. Most of the time, what we have seen, IT is very comfortable. They know when they are drafting the strategy, they know what kind of a service they are running, what kind of applications they are running. But it is very important to understand how these applications are being utilized within the department, and if there is any additional things that typically they do that you need to be aware of. Then the last thing is, once this entire thing has happened, you have switched over to your backup plan. How are you going, once the problem is resolved, how are you going to fail back to your primary site? So just to give you an example, I think that's fine. But I was just thinking of giving an example of a car. You in case if your tire gets flat, you have a spare tire that you use, but that tire is not built forever. At last, you need a strategy. You need to go to workshop to get your tire fixed, so that you can ultimately you can replace the tire, or you can buy a new one. So you need some kind of a plan in place. Can we go back? I'm seeing, okay, thank you. So disaster recovery in cloud. So what are the advantages of using the cloud for your disaster recovery? If you look at the traditional way of backing up, you typically take on servers, or you might have backups on tapes. They are reliable. Sometimes it's very difficult to restore from them. And again, the amount of time that get invested or spent on maintaining these tapes and disks is enormous. So you can save this, or you can eliminate this entire thing. You don't even have to worry about things. All you need to worry about is a way to take your data and push to cloud. Once you have done that, you are pretty much, you don't have to worry about anything else. Then the underlying infrastructure is something that the cloud itself would take care. Then the next thing is, if you have a mission critical data, because of the way cloud is set up, it is redundant by nature. They have designed it like that. They have so many different locations that are available, east, west. You can go across continents if you are so much concerned about your data. So you can put your data in different regions, and in case of a disaster happens, So for instance, let's say if you're living in California, your data center is also in California, you are backing up your stuff um, in in a data center, but it still resides in California. If earthquake hits, it will going to impact both. So you can take your data and move it into some other safer regions that these cloud services offers. Um, Cloud, again, is very cost effective. There's no doubt about that. Think of it, the amount of infrastructure that you need to build. If you're building a disaster recovery environment on a brick and mortar brick and mortar data center, you need servers. You need to make sure the electricity is there, cooling, firewall, um, routers. So much stuff goes into it just to maintain your environment. So you don't have to worry about it. And the cool thing is that it is on demand. So once all you need to basically make sure that um, your virtual machines, your environment is properly replicated in the cloud. So in case when something happens, you can basically recover it. Um, then once you move into cloud, your infrastructure is replicated. In case if there is a need to scale, there is a demand that you need to scale up, you can quickly do that. And if once that demand is over, you can go back to the normal state, whatever it was before. It's a lot more efficient. The other thing is that you can, if you have multiple data centers running, including on-premise, you can reduce that infrastructure. Not only that, you can basically deprecate your legacy environment, and you can move all that stuff into cloud. And then again, one of my favorite feature here is faster recovery. If you have leveraged all the tools and you have done automation and scripting, not only it will gonna take the entire process more efficiently, it will gonna recover the environment very quickly as well.
We will now take a few seconds to complete our second poll. Please take a moment to answer the questions. We are now closing the poll. Thank you.
Okay, so Azure Site Recovery. The cool thing about Azure Site Recovery is that it basically provides. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So the thing that about what Microsoft Azure Site Recovery offers, that it provides a single solution for your DR needs. Whether you have Hyper-V, VMware, physical machines running in your data centers and on-premise, you can just use it to build your disaster recovery strategy and for your recovery plan as well. So there is no limit. It doesn't limit you. So that's the beauty of it. So instance, if you're running Hyper-V, VMware physical or physical servers, you can still leverage it. And then the other thing is that it gives you an option. How do you want to basically replicate, where you want to replicate your environment? Can we move on to the next slide? So if you look at this slide, so just continuing from earlier slides here. So regardless of your underlying technology, whether if it is a VMware, Hyper-V, or physical, you can use it to replicate your existing environment to a location of your choice. So when I say location of your choice, what does that mean? It provides a tooling that you can leverage to orchestrate the replication and recovery between cloud, it could be another site, or within your on-premise private, enabling this as a target for failover in the event of a disaster. So if you look at this screen, if you're running virtual machine on-premise, you can replicate that to another site. You can, if you're running Hyper-V, you can do the same. Or if you have if you have invested heavily in a SAN technology, you can still leverage Azure Site Recovery to orchestrate the replication and key workloads between sites. So harnessing the power of, you can still harness the power of the SAN technology. So I will give you a few seconds here just to look at it so that you can absorb. I know this is pretty heavy slide, just to absorb it, and then I'm going to give you an idea what it is. What is the typical process that you have to leverage in order to build is a disaster recovery in Azure. So in your on-premise environment, on the left side, if you look at it, you have you might be running VMware, or it could be a physical server. If when you are running a VMware or physical server, in that case, you would need some additional configuration. As I said, you know, it works across different platforms. Yes, it does. When you're using Hyper-V, it's a little bit more simplified way of replicating from your on-premise to cloud. But when you have a physical server or a VMware installed within your premise, then you need to do some additional, you need to install some additional servers, and you need to do some additional configuration. So if you look at this diagram on the left side with where the cloud is green, you have there is something called a process server. So you would need this process server. The responsibility of this process server is to do a coordination and communication, and then manages, and it is also responsible for managing the replication between your on-premise and cloud and the recovery process. Along with this, when you basically set up this process, this process server, there are some additional components that you have to install. These additional servers are responsible for basically receiving data from protected machines. So one of the server that you would need, or component you would need, is called process server within the configuration server. That process server is again responsible for receiving data from protected machines. It optimizes it with caching. Then it also performs encryption, and then send it over to storage, to Azure storage. One of the other thing that this process server, which is running in configuration server, inside a configuration server, is to push the installation of mobility server. So now the question is, what is a mobility server? Basically, mobility server is an agent that you need to install on each virtual machine, and they are responsible for creating the data replication from the machine that they have installed on to, and they transfer that data to the process server or configuration server, and from there the process server takes over, and then it migrates or replicates that data to cloud. One of the other things that, again, based upon our experience that we have seen when we are implementing disaster recovery using Azure Site ASR, Azure Site Recovery, if you have a heavy workload, then you would need another dedicated process server in the cloud, and also an additional master server on-premise. So what is master target? The master target is something you use in case of a failback. So once you are done, um, you have recovered, everything is great. You don't want to go back to your primary site. It basically responsible for it handles the replication data during the fallback from Azure to your primary site. So when you want to go back to your primary site, it plays the master target plays its part. So the thing is to remember one thing, that if you have a heavy load, you might need a dedicated master target installed within your environment as well. Typically, the process server and master target is something that you can install as part of additional components within your configuration server. But again, if the traffic is heavy, if the load is heavy, you would need a dedicated server. So there are so many different scenarios when you talk about when you're basically planning or implementing a disaster recovery. If you're replicating VMware to Azure, you would need different steps. Typical steps are same, but you would need some additional configurations and components. If you are using Hyper-V with Virtual Machine Manager or without Virtual Machine Manager, then you have to basically take different steps or some additional steps. If you have a physical server, obviously, then it would require some additional and different steps as well. The typical process, if you have like 2 or 3 machines, it could take hours. And we have our lab in our headquarters that we typically use for our testing purposes, for migrating and all those things. I would love to share. I'm kind of a demo guy. I would love to share that with you guys. I would love to show and walk you guys through, but obviously we don't have that much time available. So what we have done here is just to give you an idea what typically it entails to set up a scenario for Hyper-V. Let's say, so to set up, to give you an idea here, for instance, you already have Hyper-V installed within your environment in your on-premise, and you want to basically replicate that in Azure. So in case of a disaster, you can just fail over to Azure and spin up the environment in there. So the first thing what you do typically is you need a subscription. You go and sign up with Azure. You need to get the subscription. Once you have that subscription, you need to go and create a recovery service vault. Think of it more like a container that you have to set up and create within your subscription. And then once you have done that, you have to take some additional configuration. The first thing is you have to click on your site recovery. I don't know how much you would be able to see the screen. I hope that it's clear and you can still understand the typical process here to implement this site recovery in Azure. So you click on site recovery, then it has 3 different steps. The first one is to prepare the infrastructure. And when you're preparing the infrastructure, you have to provide your protection goal. What are your protection goals? Are you basically trying to move it to another site, or you are thinking of moving to Azure? Are you trying to replicate those into Azure or maybe on-premise? So whatever it is, you have to basically specify that first. Then it asks you that the environment or the servers that you are trying to move, or the machines that you are trying to move, are they virtualized? And what kind of virtualizations are you using? Is it a VMware or is it a Hyper-V? So you have to kind of tell it. And then the last thing is, are you on your premise, are you using a System Center VMM, Virtual Machine Manager? Yes and no, because then if you have it, then you have to take some different steps versus if you don't have it. So once you have entered all that information, it takes you to the next step, which is preparing your source environment. So now that we have set up the base and we have provided the information to Azure. So depending on your choices, it kind of gives you different options. So now that we are using Hyper-V as our platform, as a source platform that we want to migrate to Azure, it once you do that, it asks you to basically go and create a site or create a Hyper-V site. So once you have entered that name, in our case, we have entered Motifworks Azure. Then it gives you two to three different steps that you're supposed to be taking. And they are very simple steps. The first one is that you have to download an agent or provider. And along with that, it gives you a registration key. And just keep in mind that key is only valid for 5 days. So once you have generated, you have 5 days to download that key along with the software, and then you go and install that on the Hyper-V host. And when you are doing that, it basically asks for this key so that it knows, and that key contains all the information that where and how it needs to connect with the vault, the Azure Recovery Vault that you have created within your subscription. So it has that information. So it goes back and read that information, and then it kind of fill out that information in here, as you can see on the screen. This is basically the installer that you get when you click on the download. This is the installer that is downloaded on your machine. You click on it next, and then it will gonna walk you through the steps, and it will gonna install on your virtual machine host. Once you have done that piece, once you have prepared your source environment and you have installed the provider setup on each host, which is running on your environment, then the next step is to configure the target environment. So when you say target environment, okay, that means you know what kind of environment you are going to create in case of that disaster when that recovery process happens. So you have to basically specify all those parameters in here. You have to basically specify, okay, what kind of a storage you will going to use. You have to provide what kind of a networking are you planning to use with it. Some of the concept, I hope and I believe that you know you have the basic understanding about virtual networking and how it works within Azure. I think that would be helpful. But you have to basically specify. You have the ability to configure the network, or at the same time you are doing this configuration, or you can perform it later as well. Then you also have to basically specify the policy that how frequently do you want to replicate the data, and what are the recovery point retention in hours, and how soon you want to start this. Let's say you can schedule it. You can say I want this entire recovery process starts tomorrow, or maybe off peak times. So you have the ability to control that entire thing. So once you have done this process, what you want to do is, and this is a very important step, and what you need to do here is you need to do a capacity planning. And in order to do the capacity, Microsoft has done some, it has done a great job. It gives you the tools for Hyper-V and vSphere that you can download and install it on your virtual machines that you're planning to protect. And it will going to run there. It will going to assess the utilization of your IOPS, your memory, CPU utilization, because you need to know that in order to basically recreate that environment in Azure. So this planning is imperative. You need to know all that information so that you can pick the right instance. And one of the things that we have learned, the people who have implemented or have tried to implement, this is where they don't do the due diligence. They don't spend time in understanding the exact utilization, how resource intensive their environment is, how resource intensive their applications are. you need to do that in order to pick the right instance and set up everything correctly in Azure. You need to know your daily daily change, how much, like if how much a change, or how much on your daily basis, how much additional data is being added to your disk. So you need to know your daily change rate. So you will have so that you would know, okay, how much additional data that you have to replicate every day. So along with those tools that I was talking to you guys, there's another thing that Microsoft offers. It's called Azure Site Recovery Planning Tool. And it has two different options. One is a quick, and another one is detailed. On a quick one, when you download this tool, you can enter how many instances you have, how many different disks are associated or linked with your virtual machines, how much data they have, what's your bandwidth, network bandwidth, inbound, outbound. So you have to basically provide all that information, and then once you have entered and provided all that information, it kind of gives you a good estimate that when the first time you're replicating these virtual machines, it may gonna take you 10 hours, 20 hours, or whatever it is. So once you have done that planning and everything is good, you go back and then you pick up the instance on Azure site, and you need to do that configuration that, okay, for this virtual machine and this, I want this kind of instance. So you don't get any surprises if you have done that capacity planning properly. So the next step is you basically enable replication. And when you're enabling this, you need to basically provide the storage account information, what network that you want to use, what would be the post failover Azure network. If you want to use a different network, VNet, you can basically use that. You have to specify the subnet it should use. So if you have a specific IP address range, or if you have a specific IP addressing, you can basically assign that as well. One of the things that I hear a lot, okay, what if I have a static IP or that I use? So during the provisioning phase, ASR provides you the ability to basically assign that IP address to your virtual machine.
Murad, we're getting close, and we need to move quickly.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm taking my technical part, for some reason, likes to explain things in detail. So the last piece is, once you have done everything is great, you have done the configuration, then one of the greatest feature of which I liked it, and when I demonstrate to our clients, they kind of loved it, is the ability to do the test failover. How many times, if I walked in an organization, I asked them, hey, can you show me your disaster recovery? Can you execute it? And they laugh, and I know that because I've myself gone through this. I understand that it's not easy to build a disaster recovery and do and do a pilot testing or do a test failover. But with Azure Site Recovery, it gives you this ability where you can create a isolated network environment and perform your testing in there, and you can see that your machines or your workloads are getting up, and you can test the application without impacting your production environment. One of the other things that, because of the time I moved quickly, is you can create the production groups. So for instance, let me give an example. Your SharePoint depends on a web server, and then it also depends on an application server and SQL server. So there's a dependency between these three. So in order for SharePoint to work correctly, you have to make sure that when you are recovering, these three servers recover together. So you can define that protection group and recovery plan in Azure, so that when they recover together and work as expected. You can also do unplanned failover. So if something goes down, you can just move your traffic from from your on-premise or data center to Azure in case of an unexpected incident or maybe a power outage. You can also do a planned failover where you can shut down your primary site and then move everything to your or move your traffic to Azure and see how everything works without any data loss. Again, depending on RPO and RTO. So you can do all those things. The next thing is the pricing. I think it's if for pricing the first 30, I'm sorry, I need to move a little bit faster. But for the first 30 first days, it's free. So it's a great, so ASR provides you a great opportunity to go and play with it. If you have a dev test, I think it's a great opportunity you can replicate from your production or your stage environment to your dev test using ASR. This is one of the other things you can do, by the way, with ASR as well, where you need to replicate an environment from one to another place. So the first 31 days is free. If you want to do recovery on your own site, then it is $16 per instance. That means per virtual machine. If you want to basically do the site recovery on Azure, then it is $25 per instance. That means per virtual machine. So just to give you an idea, I hope nobody would one day stop me and tell me, hey, you told us that unit was gonna be $10, now it is $11. It's just to give you an idea that this is how much you should expect. So for instance, if you have 10 virtual machines running in your environment, so $25 per instance, it will gonna cost you $25 to $50. But one more thing to remember, there's an additional cost, not much, and it is the storage. So for instance, you have to calculate if the per if you have a virtual machine that has 300 gigabytes of data or 300 gigabytes or GB, then it will gonna cost you 0.01 per GB. So if you have 300, that means it will gonna cost you $30. Then along with that, they have a calculator, by the way, on Azure Site as well, where you can go and put this number, and it kind of gives you this calculation. Then you use how many inserts, when I say put or updates, you will gonna perform. Let's say I went with 1 million, and then it is 0.100 per 1,000 operations, so it's just $10. Data retrieval for 3,000 gigabytes is like $30. Data write, again, same calculation, 0.3 per GB is $75. So you are kind of looking at $327.50 per month estimated cost. And I believe that there is no way it can cost you this much if you are building a disaster recovery on premise on some other site, because there's always so much stuff that goes into it. It's not even, that's why it's so cost effective. And you pay for what you use. That's the other thing. When you spin up your environment, when you do the recovery and you're using the virtual machines in Azure, then you pay for it. And you don't have to even worry about, if you're just doing a backup there, because you know that once I start using it, then I have to go back and pay for it.
Thank you, Murad, for today's presentation, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. We appreciate your questions and this opportunity to interact with you. Please know we'll make the recording of this webinar available to you promptly. We'll gladly connect with any of you who would like to continue the conversation offline. We have Azure workshops that you can utilize. For each workshop, we have defined scope and deliverable. As an attendee for this webinar, you qualify to get one of these workshops complimentary. Please ask your questions. Murad, we will wait a few more seconds for more questions to come in, and then I will read them out to you.
Sure.
How long does it take to replicate the server in cloud?
Okay, this is an interesting question. It depends, your bandwidth and how much data that you have on your machine. So there are so many different calculation goes into in order to basically get you the estimate how long it will going to take for you to take and replicate everything into Azure. For instance, if you have a virtual machine that has 1 GB, but your network bandwidth is 1 GB, that doesn't mean that you will going to move everything within the expected time to Azure because your bandwidth would be utilized for so many other things as well. So typically, again, it's difficult to say it until unless we have done that assessment and see, what kind of a bandwidth you have available within your network.
Thank you. We have another question. Can the process server be a VM, a virtual machine, or physical, and can it be shared? And can it be a shared server on an existing VM?
It can be. And again, if you have just a few virtual machines, it can be virtualized, and it will gonna work fine. But if you have heavy load, and if you have more than I would say 5 machines, then I would recommend having a dedicated process server, because you will see that it will gonna impact the performance greatly. Because just think of it, how many things it is doing. It is doing encryption. It is basically performing compression, and then it is also responsible for moving your data. So based upon my experience and our other architects that we have, what we advise that typically go with dedicated server if you're looking for good performance.
Can it be a virtual machine, or does it have to be a physical server?
You can have a virtual machine. Yes, it can be a virtual machine. That's not a problem.
Thank you. We'll gladly connect with any of you who would like to continue the conversation offline. We also welcome your feedback for today's webinar so we can improve our efforts for you next time. Please check your inbox for a brief survey that will be emailed to you in a few moments. Thank you for attending the webinar.